Hey, greetings there, everyone. It is your boy Glee Khan back at you again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we wrapped up just about our last zone in World of Warcraft Classic with the Terrestrial Glades zone, finishing that up with a Forsaken Warlock. We also did the entirety of Chapter 7 in Lands of Mystery, which is the Dungeons and Dragons spin on World of Warcraft. It's actually the second iteration. There was a big clutch of source books that came out just called Warcraft, the role-playing game. And then they kind of revamped it and redid some and expanded some with this other series. And we're reading this one in depth because it's from the perspective of Bran Bronzebeard, and it's sort of got this lore vibe to it. But on the last chapter, we just perused some adventures, hooks, and concepts that they have mildly fleshed out. So stay a while and listen as we start chapter 8. This has got to be one of the last chapters. And this one is talking about the different organizations throughout Azeroth, throughout the game. And we're going to start with the Bloodsail Buccaneers. I think this one's unique, or not unique, but interesting, because we read the manga about it, and it was a pretty neat one. So this organization has a membership of 1,200. I feel like I've killed more than 1,200 on a single character. They're pretty evil and in it for the money. We've talked about Plunder Isle both in this book, and we saw it on the manga. And they're basically pirates, smugglers. We know a little bit about them. So here we go. 6 or 7 years ago, ooh, I hate that when you have a word 6 and then the number 7. And a man named Falrevere had a grand estate in Kultiris. He was one of Admiral Dalen Proudmoore's greatest rivals on the island, and he boasted a dozen merchant ships and twice as many warships. Falrevere enjoyed sailing and was good at it. He often joined his men on the seas, patrolling for pirates and following his goods down the coast, breathing the sea air and seeing interesting sights. Falrevere wasn't particularly friendly or likable, but he kept his people fed and safe, and so they liked him. Falrevere was a staunch believer in human supremacy. He thought the other races, elves, dwarves, and gnomes, in addition to orcs and goblins and the others, would be the downfall of Kultiris and Lordaeron, perhaps of the world. He advocated harsh measures against the other races, which made him unpopular but attracted people of his like mindset. When the Third War began, Falrevere was at sea with one of his battleships. A griffin rider found him and the small fleet with which he sailed. The dwarf told him of the war and begged him to come to the assistance of Drisburg on the northern coast of Kultiris. Falrevere sneered at the dwarf but agreed and put a sail to the wind. Upon sighting Drisburg, the Duke saw that the Scourge had landed a small army on the coast and laid siege to the town. The defenders fired catapults and a few cannons at their besiegers, but there was little they could do. Falrevere calculated and came to the conclusion that if he landed and fought the Scourge, Drisburg would have about a 50% chance of surviving the onslaught, but most of its people and Falrevere's people would die. Many of Drisburg's citizens were gnome and dwarf immigrants from Ironforge. Falrevere's choice was clear. He turned his ships around and bid goodbye to the doomed settlement. Many of his crew members railed against this action. Falrevere threw the loudest overboard. Knowing he could never set foot in Kultiris again, Falrevere sailed to the mainland for news of the war. He learned that the invasion was in full swing. Lordaeron's north had become a blighted and twisted land overrun with undead monstrosities. "This is because we made friends with those damn elves and dwarves," Falrevere muttered. "I'll have no more part in this land's folly." He gathered his crew and announced that any sailor who wished to do so could disembark here and fight for Lordaeron. As for himself, he was going to re-establish his estate elsewhere, a tropical island in the South Seas perhaps, where the Scourge could not reach them, and he could choose his friends. Many of his soldiers left his ships and died on Lordaeron soil, but more joined him. A month later, Falrevere found Plunder Isle and began construction of his new fortress. Once a stalwart Lordaeron noble, Duke Falrevere became a professional pirate lord. The Bloodsail Buccaneers are a bunch of vile bastards, and everyone who knows them knows it. Others see them as ruthless and devoid of scruples, which they are. 5 years on Plunder Isle has done little to improve Falrevere's disposition, and he and every pirate under his banner seem to bear a personal grudge against everyone they come across, especially non-humans. This grudge is particularly strong when it comes to the Blackwater Raiders. Falrevere despises the Blackwater Raiders because the despicable trade princes, goblins, provide the raiders with gold, equipment, and other support. Falrevere believes that humans rightfully deserve control of the seas. Tavern tales also say that the Blackwater Raiders are responsible for the death of Falrevere's son, though the same tales mention that Falrevere was never fond of his son. The Buccaneers and the Raiders have clashed numerous times over the last 5 years. Maybe it was the Blackwater Raiders that was actually in our story, because this is not meshing with the crew we read about in the manga. As for themselves, the Bloodsail Buccaneers revel in their reputation. They display their characteristic rust-red, black and brown clothing with pride, and make sure their symbol, a double-masted ship's silhouette against a bloody sun, is always predominant. The Buccaneers ply the waters between Azeroth and the South Seas and occasionally travel west toward Kalimdor. They frequent seedy taverns in Booty Bay, where they and the Blackwater Raiders duel in the streets and bars, Bilgewater Port, and Steamweedle Port. In addition to ambushing merchant ships that come to the South Seas, they and the Blackwater Raiders are embroiled in a private naval war that spans the length of the sea from Steamweedle to Booty Bay. Okay. Organization. Duke Falrevere runs the Bloodsail Buccaneers and is usually sailing the seas on his flagship, the Devil Shark. 4 Commodores assist him, each of whom is in charge of about a dozen pirate ships. Fleet Masters command smaller groups of ships, Captains command individual ships, and their first mates take over when they fall. Most of the Bloodsail elites are former members of Falrevere's estate. Knights, reeves, and the like who joined him in his exile. When a Commodore falls, Falrevere personally selects their replacement. He picks those he trusts. Loyalty is more valuable than skill for Falrevere, who knows that what an odious bunch he commands and realizes the potential for mutiny and betrayal. However, his experience as a noble proves valuable in his new role, and while he's become a thoroughly unpleasant individual, he keeps his men and women well fed with food, plunder, and blood, and so most are glad to have him at their head. Locations. The Buccaneers' primary base is on Plunder Isle. They control a fort called Bloodsail Hold, displaying a remarkable lack of originality. Bloodsail Hold is well protected and strategically located. Buccaneers range throughout the South Seas and Azeroth's west and south coasts. Occasionally they make raids along Kalimdor's coasts as well. Members. Imagine the most bloodthirsty and depraved person you can. This person is probably a member of the Bloodsail Buccaneers. About half the Buccaneers are remnants of Falrevere's original crew that betrayed Lordaeron and Coltyrus for a life of piracy. The remaining members come from the waterfront saloons and docks. The Bloodsail Buccaneers aren't above press-ganging people into their service, which that's what happened in the manga. As Falrevere has a reputation for treating his people reasonably well, new members are in ready supply. At least they're enough to replace the Buccaneers who fall in their missions. These are people with nowhere else to go, or those who enjoy bloodshed and the seas, or those who want to vent their hatred of non-humans, or those looking for an easy gold piece. The Buccaneers don't try to train new members, though a few individual captains implement such schemes. For the most part, the life of a new Bloodsail Buccaneer is often literally sink or swim. Falrevere and his pirate followers blame the fall of Lordaeron and the rise of the undead on other races like orcs and elves. That's why they're so pissed at everyone and have cultivated an exclusive group. It was literally a human who was the main person that killed it all. Okay, so now let's discuss the leaders. Duke Falrevere. So he's a 17th level dude. Aristocrat, buccaneer, warrior. Falrevere is tall and lanky with black hair, long mustaches, and a short beard. He wears a tri-corner black hat pulled low over his eyes. He is neither affable nor likable, but keeps his people together. He prefers to give his commodores, fleet masters, and captains free rein, but when they err, he responds with veiled threats and detailed explanations of what went wrong and what could have been done to make it right. Despite his threats, he is protective of the Bloodsail Buccaneers and each of its members, and only rarely does he execute pirates under his command, though he has no problems with individual captains engaging in such brutal justice. Falrevere spends almost all his time aboard the Devil Shark, hunting Blackwater raiders, and stops off in Bloodsail Hold only occasionally. He is distant with few friends. Commodore Jesse Falrevere. Is that a wife or a daughter? This is a rogue who is basically level 8. Aristocrat, rogue, buccaneer. Jessie Falrevere is Duke Falrevere's daughter. She's in her mid-20s and is a short, solid woman who looks as if she has a hint of dwarf in her veins. She is red-faced from shouting, drink, and sun. She seems to have been trying to make up for her gender since she came to terms with her pirate lifestyle, and can drink most men under the table. She commands her ships in much the same way as her father does, though she is more gregarious and has many friends among her captains and crew. She is moody and prone to extremes. If you're not her friend, you're probably her enemy, and she deals with her enemies harshly. Lordaeron's fall, her father's descent into evil, and her brother's demise have worked together to make her a hard and ruthless individual. Jessie was barely 20 when Duke Falrevere began building Bloodsail Hold. She was depressed for months, for her mother had been left behind in Kul Tiras, and none knew her fate. Her brother Magrin, who saw the shift to piracy as a grand adventure, dragged her out of her despair. When he died before the cannons of the Blackwater Raiders, all that was once good and fun in her shattered. She must be a sad, sad woman now. We will see Chapter 9 on the rules for the Buccaneer class, so this is not the last chapter. Commodore Lester Zank is a level 10 human warlock. In Kul Tiras, young Lester served as a minor mage in Falrevere's estate. The noble indulged the lad's interest in the dark arts out of respect for his father, who died in Falrevere's service when Lester was a baby. Others were not so kind and shunned the pale, bald, fatherless boy. It's like Lester, Fester, bald, pale. When the scourge invaded Lordaeron, Lester traveled to the mainland thinking to join with the undead. The sight of the creatures horrified him, however, and he lost his nerve. He found a secret basement and hid, surviving on preserved fruit while the Third War raged above. Finally, he emerged and slunk past the undead forces, hoping to find the only man who had ever shown him kindness. 3 years ago, he reunited with Falrevere and became a Bloodsail Buccaneer. Lester is fiercely loyal to Duke Falrevere, and he and Jessie are the only people the Duke allows into his confidence. Lester's sailing skills leave much to be desired, but the past 3 years, in his emulation of Duke and Jessie Falrevere, have taught him much. His sailors are afraid of him, and he is ruthless when it comes to destroying his enemies. He often takes dangerous measures to accomplish his goals, such as pursuing an enemy vessel into a probable trap, or taking a shortcut over a coral reef. Lester's arcane powers, particularly those that involve fire, are valuable in naval engagements, and the young warlock has finally found people who respect his abilities. Commodore Wallace Boltscrew is a human tinker, level 8. Okay. A high-ranking member of Duke Falrevere's personal staff back in Kul Tiras, Wallace and his collection of fellow tinkers, whom he calls Wallace's Warriors, are valuable additions to Falrevere's crew. Wallace and the other tinkers improved the Bloodsail Buccaneers by adding technology to their equipment. Armored plating and more powerful cannons were only the first step. Wallace has tried numerous other experiments as well, and has slain only a dozen or so sailors testing them. A couple years ago, Wallace ran into another human engineer, Annetta Crank, in Bilgewater Port, and the two are now inseparable lovers and inventors. The two of them have crafted several submarines that could prove extremely dangerous. Duke Falrevere is holding these vessels secretly beneath Bloodsail Hold for now, for fear of tipping his hand to the Blackwater Raiders before he is ready. This also sounds like a little bit of the Defius kind of, it makes me think of the Stockade. Or no, what is it? Out in Westfall. The Dead Mines. Wallace was a valuable member of Falrevere's household before the Third War. He created devices to assist in all manner of situations and was the head of the other servants. He was head butler, he still wears his butler suit, head chief, and stable master. Once he started constructing devices of war, though, he found his calling. I surmise that Wallace isn't really an evil individual, he's just found his passion, and unfortunately he happened to be a Bloodsail Buccaneer at the time. One could conceivably convince him to work for someone else, where his genius could be better used against those who really deserve a torpedo up the kill. All right, cool. So I don't remember if the Bloodsail Buccaneers or the Blackwater Raiders. We'll have to see. I'm sure we'll do Blackwater Raiders on the next one. I think that's... No, the Burning Blade is next, so maybe they skip out on Blackwater Raiders. Interesting. Okay, cool. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I like this one. This is a nice backstory of an organization that you otherwise don't get to learn too much about. Thanks for watching and listening, everyone. I appreciate you. Really, I do. See you next time on Lore of Warcraft.